Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. The UN General Assembly is going on, and good news for humankind. The global warming monstrosity of Copenhagen, scheduled for December 2009, is in big trouble. This, of course, was the attempt to strangle worldwide economic development with a carbon tax, obligatory binding carbon limits that would essentially undermine national sovereignty everywhere, under the cover story of this lunatic theory that carbon dioxide and related carbon emissions are somehow changing the weather. Clearly, this debate goes on, but the idea that it is a result of the sunspot cycle and solar activity is gaining ground, so much so that one of the leading honchos in this international political panel that the UN has cobbled together has said that we've now reached a plateau. He's obviously attempting to do a kind of limited hangout or a line of defense, saying the warming tendency has now slowed down and we've reached a plateau and we're going to stay at the plateau for 10 years. Now, of course, that is an attempt to mask the fact that in reality it looks like global cooling has set in. Get your 2009 Old Farmer's Almanac and you'll read a halfway competent and rather interesting story of how sunspot activity and solar activity in general is the main thing going on with this. Now, Ban Ki-moon, the crackpot UN General Secretary, has called a meeting of heads of state, an emergency global warming carbon footprint summit for New York, featuring Barkey, featuring Obama. And the attempt was there to launch a new round of hysterical global warming rhetoric, but the conference is in trouble. Let's look, for example, at the speech by Chinese President Hu Jintao to the General Assembly in New York this week. He says, yes, we in China are willing to do all sorts of things for global warming and on, but there will be no binding carbon limits. And we know that there was this interesting convergence between China and India, found a common front, saying that they reject the attempt to strangle their economies and to throttle their economic development under the cover of this reactionary myth of global warming, a legend agreeable to rich elitists, to parasites, and to other very comfortable rentiers, but obviously not good for the poor people of the third world, people who get by farming maybe 1/3 of an acre in India and who have to use treadles, right, treadmill-operated pumps to get some water up to have a vegetable garden and eke out a miserable existence based on this. The proposition is clear. The global warming carbon limits mean that world economic development will stop. There will never be development of the third world, and the genocide will go on. It's 30 to 40,000 die every day from this, and it's increasing. 1 billion people with a B are on the verge of starvation. They're hungry and could fall into starvation at any time. The Waxman-Markey monstrosity here in the United States, if this were to pass, the export prices of U.S. corn, important for Latin America, U.S. grain, important for the entire world, would double at least. And, of course, when Goldman Sachs gets a hold of the carbon offset market, they will then more than double the export price of that food, meaning that hundreds of millions of people in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and other poor areas will pitch into starvation and death. It is an ultra-Hitlerian genocidal project, must be stopped. Now, Waxman-Markey, this cap-and-trade, cap-and-tax monstrosity, is bogged down, but there will now be an attempt by the global warming fanatics to push aside everything and say we've got to go on to Copenhagen. Gordon Brown, in his speech to the UN General Assembly, said that the next 6 months will be decisive for the entire future of humanity. He said we congratulate ourselves that we got through the past 12 months. Yeah, you, Gordon Brown, with your bailouts and with your attacks on small countries like Iceland. Now he says the next 6 months will be even more decisive, because if we don't have a global warming treaty in place by 2010, it's essentially the end of the world. It's all over. And they trot out various island dependencies of the British Empire to say we don't want to go under the water. I don't think that the evidence on that is at all conclusive. So we also then had Obama's speech to the UN General Assembly. Obama is presiding over a meeting of the UN Security Council where he will preach the doctrine of nuclear disarmament. Now, this takes us right back to Carter. Carter was, of course, hysterically anti-nuclear, fanatically anti-nuclear. 3 Mile Island happening on his watch through the connivance of green fanatics helped a lot. But with Carter, you could see how the rhetoric of disarmament could be used as a powerful political weapon. That's what Obama is trying to do. That is also what Gordon Brown is joining in on. Gordon Brown says the United Kingdom has 4 Trident missile-firing submarines. We are prepared to go from 4 Trident missile-firing submarines to only 3. And, of course, the idea here is to put the strong arm on Iran, on North Korea, but also on all sorts of other countries. Interesting in Gordon Brown's speech is that he says the onus of proving that you're not producing nuclear weapons is now transferred to the developing countries themselves. In other words, the rich elitist Gordon Brown, the architect of the world derivatives bubble, presiding over the City of London and the heritage of imperialism over centuries, says, we are putting you in court. You have got to be guilty until proven innocent. And in fact, it's the Code Napoleon, guilty until proven innocent, by Gordon Brown vis-a-vis countries like Iran and others. And of course, there are lots of others that this can be used on. Gordon Brown says, we'll be happy to help you to get peaceful nuclear energy. Gordon Brown even cited Eisenhower and the Atoms for Peace program. He said, we will create a worldwide uranium bank, and you will be invited to use it. Now, of course, you just have to ask somebody in Iceland, for example, what? How can you trust the British? Certainly, if you ever got into a crisis, for example, if you owed the City of London some money, wouldn't they then find a way to ban you from exercising your drawing rights on the British uranium bank? It's just this idea, undermining sovereignty. The only way to push ahead is to have your own guaranteed energy, your own guaranteed production, not dependent on the will of other countries. That is an important component of sovereignty. So nuclear disarmament is one of the cards that Obama is playing. Now, for those who still don't get it, the idea that Obama has called off the Polish missile crisis is exactly what I talked about for the past 18 months. Under Obama, the U.S. takes a step backward from the brink of confrontation with all sorts of other countries. The U.S. is supposedly not going to be involved. Rather, and I went through this in some length, the idea is to play other countries one against the other. Get rid of the enemy states by playing one of them against the other. Example, Georgia. Now, in this case, the cloak is so threadbare that it's clear that the hand of the U.S. is behind it. But remember, Georgia, joined by Ukraine, by Poland, by Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, you get an echelon of petty states that can be played against Russia, at least according to the thinking of Brzezinski. That's the goal. So it's not surprising that they want to remove the direct U.S.-Russian confrontation, because the goal now is to use Russia as a cat's paw against Iran. Back in a minute.